Hi, I'm Eric Twiggs. Welcome to this Automotive Training Institute webinar. Today we'll be discussing first who, then what, how to find the right people, and stop feeling stuck. What if I offered you $10 million with the following catch? To get the $10 million, you'd have to jump out of an airplane without a parachute. Would you do it? I can see you shaking your head no from here. Now, let me add this twist. What if I told you that the airplane was on the ground? Would that change your decision? What just happened? You just made a major decision without having all of the facts. And knowing what you now know, you'd probably make a different decision. Have you ever made a hiring decision without having all of the facts? And knowing what you now know, you would have made a different decision? Well, don't feel too bad. Don't beat yourself up. That just confirms that you've dialed on to the right webinar. As a matter of fact, most interviewers make hiring decisions within the first 4 minutes or less during an interview. And that's a recipe to get stuck with the wrong person. Now, let's discuss what's in it for you. You'll learn about the 5 reasons for wrong hires. You'll leave with strategies to find and hire the A player that you've been looking for. When I refer to an A player, I'm not just referring to an A technician. It could be an A tech, a B tech, a C tech, or it could be a service manager. But you'll leave with specific strategies to find and hire that individual. You'll love the enhanced interview and reference check questions that you can literally hang up from this webinar and start using immediately, or you can start using it next week at your shop. Now let's address the elephant in the room. Why me? Why am I qualified to present this to you today? I spent 9 years as a district manager with 500 people working for me at any given time. I've done over 1,000 interviews over the last 15 years, and every week I'm doing a second interview for one of my clients to help them find that A player. But here's the true reason that I'm qualified to present this to you today. I have mastered the science of making a bad hire. As a matter of fact, if you ever wanted to know how to hire the wrong person, just call and ask me. I can walk you through it. I've mastered that. My goal today is to keep you from making a lot of the same mistakes that I made in my past. 2 books that you need to know about. The first book is called Top Grading. It was written by Dr. Brad Smart. It's a great book. He conducted 4,000 different case studies of different businesses from all over the world to come up with the content. And the majority of the content and principles that I'm presenting are based on his material. And then his son actually had a book called Who, the A Method for Hiring. And he covers a lot of the same information. He's got a couple of interesting twists. I would encourage you to pick up both of these books when you have a chance. Let's get to work. Let's start to define what an A player really is. And these definitions came from Brad Smart. And again, keep in mind, he did the 4,000 case studies to come up with this terminology. An A player, according to Brad, is someone in the top 10% of the talent that's available for the position. They have a 90% chance to achieve results that only the top 10% can accomplish. Now, often I'm talking to different shop owners and I'll ask them how they define an A player, and they tell me things like someone that's loyal, someone that's diligent, someone that's a hard worker. Well, it's a lot deeper than that. It really comes down to results and outcomes. Can this individual produce the desired results and outcomes? So if we're talking about a service manager, can this service manager produce a $450 ARO while maintaining an average hour per ticket of 3 hours per ticket and produce 10 5-star Google reviews? That's an A-level performance. If it's a technician, Can he be 100% productive and have zero comebacks over a 30-day time span? Think about the results and outcomes. The other thing to consider is, can they become an A player in 6 to 12 months? One of the things we teach here at ATI is that you can find a service manager who's not an industry veteran. So that person may not come into the building and take off as an A player immediately, but can they become an A player in 6 to 12 months? And we'll provide you with some tools and resources to make that decision. Now, I'm about to say something that's controversial. You'll probably be very upset with me, but here we go. Great companies view hiring as a process of elimination, not of inclusion. See, when I was coming up through the ranks early in my career, I thought hiring was this inclusive process. We have to bring in people and we have to help the area and the market. No. The great companies and great organizations view hiring as a process of elimination. For example, did you know that if you wanted to work for Google, you would have a 0.2% chance of getting hired? Every year they get 3 million applications from around the world, but they only hire 0.2% of the people that apply. They have a pre-visit phone screening that they do. They have 4 different structured on-site interviews. They have aptitude tests, assessment tests, personality tests. So the person that makes it successfully through their process is an A player, because that's the way the process is designed. So you should design your process to eliminate anyone that's not an A player. And you may still be saying, Eric, that's just cruel and harsh. But think about it this way. Jack Welch, he was the CEO of General Electric. He really embraced what Brad Smart taught about top grading. And there were divisions in General Electric where the worst performer or the bottom 10% performer was an A player. But that's because they were so committed to the hiring and recruiting process. So think about your shop. How would your life be impacted if your worst performer was an A player? That's the reason why you need to view hiring as a process of elimination. Next, we've got the B player. The B player represents the next 25% of the talent that's available. These are marginal performers who lack the potential to become high performers. When I think of a B player, B stands for bare minimum or barely making it. They do just enough to keep you from firing them. The challenge with the B player is that they're so convenient, because a lot of times they'll come in early, they'll stay late if you ask them to, but they don't produce results. And that's the biggest difference between an A player and the B player. So the A player is Mr. Right. The B player is Mr. Right now. And then we have the C player. This is the next 35% of the talent pool. These are your chronic underperformers. We said the B player is Mr. Right now. The C player is Mr. Wrong. And these are the individuals that are constantly targeted for layoffs. As a district manager, I was often involved in making decisions as far as who to lay off. In my 9 years, I've never laid off an A player. As a matter of fact, we used the tough times to weed out the C players. That was our opportunity to get rid of some of the underperforming people that were on the team. As a matter of fact, if someone wanted me to lay off an A player, worst case scenario, I would change his title and hide him somewhere before I got rid of someone that was really valuable to the team. And the takeaway for you is, if you're interviewing someone and they've been laid off from their past 2 or 3 positions, chances are it's because they're a C player. We've talked about the A player, the B player, the C player. So hopefully now you know the difference and you know what to look for, with the key being that the A player can produce the outcomes and results to take you to the next level. Now let's talk about the 5 reasons for wrong hires. Reason number 1, the failure to measure. Have you ever sat down with your calculator and a pen and paper and actually calculated how much your last bad hire really cost you? Your coach has a form. It's called a bad hire calculator, which will give you the opportunity to do that. But right now, we're going to walk through the items that are on that form, so when you go back and calculate, you'll know where we're coming from. First, you have to consider the hiring costs. If you went through a headhunter to find the individual, that could have cost you thousands of dollars. If you paid for background checks and other things, that could cost you thousands of dollars over time. So the hiring costs add up. Then you have to consider compensation. What are you paying the individual? $50,000 a year for 3 years, that's $150,000 of pay that you're not seeing a return of your investment on. And that's not even factoring in what you're paying for FICA, FUTA, SUTA, vacation, medical, dental. Those compensation costs can add up quickly. Next, you have administrative costs. If you're flying the person to different training sessions, some vendors actually charge you for training. Those administrative costs add up. That also factors in if you're buying office supplies, pens, papers, those types of things that help the person succeed. There's severance costs. There's unemployment costs. There's also, under severance, if it goes to a legal case, if you're being sued for whatever reason, if you have to pay court costs and legal fees. What about mistakes and lost opportunities? That's something that's very difficult to measure and quantify. And that reminds me, several years ago, back when I was a district manager, I had this location, one of my locations, it was in Landover, Maryland, and we were struggling with sales. And I had a service manager, his name was Joe. And Joe would always tell me about all of these things as to why sales were down. He would say, Eric, you just don't understand. It's the customers in this area. You don't understand, Eric. It's an election year. People are afraid to spend money. Eric, you just don't understand. It's the local economy. All of my vendors are saying it's slow. Well, times got so difficult and so tough that I had to lay Joe off. And after laying Joe off, that decision set off an interesting chain of events. I had 12 different customers contact me, thanking me for the fact that we decided to let Joe go. As a matter of fact, several of those customers told me that if Joe was still working there, they wouldn't come back. It wasn't the people. It wasn't the area. It wasn't the economy. It was Joe. And most industry studies tell us that a new customer is worth $7,000 over their lifetime to that particular shop. So 7,000 times 12, that's $84,000 in lost opportunities that I know of. Because we don't know who those 12 people told never to come back to that location because of Joe. So those mistakes and lost opportunities can add up quickly. The average impact on a small business, according to Success Magazine, for a bad hire is 6 times the individual's salary. 6 times. If you're paying an individual $50,000 a year, 50,000 times 6, that's $300,000 they're costing you. Here's a 2-part exercise I want you to do. After you dial off of the webinar, I want you to go through this 2-part exercise. First, what percentage of your hires over the past 12 months would you consider an A player based off of the definition that we just reviewed? So if you've hired 4 people and 2 would be considered A players, you're at 50%. And that's significant to know because we find that people that embrace what we're talking about have a 90% success rate of hiring A players. So 90% of their hires are A players. So that's the benchmark, 90%. You're at 50% and the benchmark is 90%, you know you've got some work to do. The next question, how much did your last bad hire cost you? And that would just be a matter of going through that bad hire calculator document that your coach has and counting the costs. We did this at the Super Conference And one of the shop owners came up with a number to the tune of $523,000 that their last bad hire cost them. That's why it's critical that we count the cost, but the failure to measure keeps us from doing that. The second reason that we end up with a wrong hire is the failure to plan. You didn't plan for the fact that your next hire probably has a wall of Gaylord at home. What do I mean by that? I got this term wall of Gaylord from the movie Meet the Fockers. It starred Dustin Hoffman and Robert De Niro. And in the movie, Dustin Hoffman is bragging about his son's accomplishment. He goes to this wall, which is the wall of Gaylord, where he displays all of his son's 9th place trophies. And when I saw that, it really speaks to the mindset of a lot of the millennials that are entering into the workforce today. And it's different from how we used to think, because in the old days, you didn't get a trophy for finishing in 9th place. That wasn't the case. But it just speaks to the different mindset and mentality. And we have to be prepared for the fact that the mindset of the person that's entering into the workforce today is different. And that's why studies show that the average millennial will have at least 6 jobs throughout the course of their career. What's the best way to prepare for that wall of Gaylord? Always be hiring. Because I've discovered that most bad hires are birthed out of desperation. Think about it. You're at the counter, you haven't had someone for a while, you've got a long line of customers that are giving you dirty looks. The instinct is to just grab the first warm body you come across, and that's how you end up with that C player. But if you're always hiring, you're prepared for surprises, you've got someone in line and on deck for work that you can plug in and take it from there. But always be hiring, that's the key. Here's how you know that you've gotten it right. When you've surrounded yourself with A players, you like your team, but you're still doing 1 interview per month. That's how you know you've gotten it right. That's the goal to aspire to. And that's when you know you've got a good plan. Now we're going to talk about hiring resources. Before we get in depth into this hiring resources conversation, I've got some bad news for you. Here it goes. A players aren't looking to work for you. Most A players aren't looking to work for you. Here's what I mean when I say that. It takes a lot of focus and effort to be an A player. So most A players are so focused on doing a great job for the shop that they currently work or the business they're currently working in that they don't have time to put their resume all over Monster and Craigslist and Career Builder because they're so focused on doing a great job where they are. As a matter of fact, many of the A players I've come across don't even have their resume updated. They're just all in to what they're currently doing. Do A players sometimes post their resume? Certainly they do. But most A players aren't looking. Most A players are what we call passive job seekers. So most of the hiring resources I'm going to talk to you about, they involve how do you attract that passive job seeker. So the first resource is Indeed.com. That's the traditional method. So if you go on Indeed.com, you click on Find Resumes in the left corner. For free, you would be able to access resumes of candidates that apply. So you would go on Indeed, after you click on Find Resume, it would give you a search bar, and you would type in automotive technician, and then you'd put your zip code, and you'd see everybody that's applied on the various sites, and you can send them an email. Can you find an A player that way? Certainly, but again, bear in mind, most A players aren't looking for another job. Next, we have the career opportunities link on your website. This is something that I see that gets overlooked. I have a client, he's in Clovis, California. He attracted a great general manager because that general manager went on his website and saw his career opportunities link and filled out the online application. Phishing. Phishing is a great technique. Here's how phishing works. Let's say you're interviewing a technician candidate. His name is Mike. You can say, so Mike, who is the best service writer you've ever worked with and what makes him so great? And Mike may tell you, it's Larry. Larry works at my shop. He's great. He's great with customers. I know that he can sell anything that I write up. Larry's the greatest guy. So now you have two options. Option number one, if you decide to hire Mike, the technician, you can have Mike recruit Larry for you. Option number two, you can actually go ahead and decide not to hire Mike and go after Larry because now you know where Larry works. Phishing is a great technique to access that passive job seeker. And chances are Larry, because he's doing a great job, doesn't have his resume updated. The next idea we're going to talk about is LinkedIn. LinkedIn is a social media site. You can access it by typing on your Google browser linkedin.com. You can sign up for an account for free. But here's my LinkedIn page. This is the home page. So if I wanted to network with A players in my area, my first step would be to follow that arrow and go up to the search bar and type in automotive technician. Now, when I do that, it'll give me this next screen where it'll say people with automotive technician titles. I would click on that and it would take me to this back page. And as you can see, there's over 41,000 people that are on LinkedIn with the title automotive technician in their profile. But I want to narrow down and I want to drill in even deeper. So I'm going to follow the arrow. And as you can see in the bottom left corner, under location, when I click my mouse on it, it would actually give me the option to type in my zip code or my surrounding zip code. And then I can even filter it down to within 10 miles of the shop or 25 miles of the shop. So let's say I do 25 miles of the shop. Once I hit enter, it'll tell me all of the candidates that are within 25 miles of the zip code. 25 miles. The typical shop has anywhere from 150 to 200 candidates within a 25-mile radius of their particular zip code. For example, let's say the candidate that you see on your screen, his name is Raphael, for example. Where it says connect in blue, I could click on connect and it would send him a friend request. And once he accepts my request, he and I would be able to communicate. And I could always send him a message through LinkedIn where I ask him, hey, Raphael, do you know of anyone that's looking for a career opportunity as a technician? And Raphael may say, yes, I am. Or he may be able to refer me to someone else. But LinkedIn has been working very well for quite a few of our clients, and I would encourage you to use it. We're now up to reason number 3, the failure to network. We did a survey here at ATI, and we found that 80% of the successful shops that have great people, they found their people via networking. As a matter of fact, I have a 20 group that I facilitate, and we were having a meeting, and we went around to the room to the different shop owners that were in attendance, and we asked them to think about their last great hire and how they found them. In 80% of the cases, it was through a network. It was either through a great person that was working for them. It was either through their B&I network. It was through their Chamber of Commerce network. It was through their great customer who referred them. It was through a vendor or tool guy. It was through some type of network. I always get the question, who should you network with? We just answered that question. But I found that your great people can be a good resource for finding other great people just because of the principle, birds of a feather flock together. So your great people work with other great people that they can refer you to. And I would suggest using the enhanced referral bonus. And here's how it works. You would pay your employee or even one of your vendors or someone else in your network up to $1,000 if they can find you a great person. And you pay it out $250 per quarter, so it gives them incentive to really look for a good person because that person needs to be employed for them to qualify for the bonus payout. And you may be saying, Eric, I don't know, $1,000, that's a lot of money. But it's a lot less money than paying out $523,000 because you made a bad hire. Always keep that in mind. Now we come to the rule of 5. And I started teaching this rule of 5 because I was having a conversation with a shop owner, and we're talking about finding technicians, and he says, Eric, get off my back. I'm doing everything I can to find a technician. So I asked him, okay, so what did you do last week to find a technician? Eric, I ran an ad. And there was silence. So he hadn't done anything else. But running an ad is what he'd always done to find people. And the takeaway is that what you've always done doesn't always work. And that's why the rule of 5 is important. So the rule of 5 states that if you have a major goal for your shop, you have to do a minimum of 5 different things per week to make that goal a reality. So with the rule of 5, what we find is that usually the first 2 ideas are things you've always done. So right now, if I asked you to come up with 5 things you were going to do to find a technician, you would probably say, I'm going to run a Craigslist ad. I'm going to look on Indeed. Those are 2 things that you've always done. We do find that the average shop runs out of ideas around point number 3. So when you feel that feeling of discomfort, it forces you to think outside the box. By the time you get to idea number 5, you'll come up with an idea like having a cookout that you broadcast on social media, and you invite all of the technicians in the area and you do an open house. Something like that is outside of the box, and those outside of the box ideas tend to work. And that's the rule of 5. Here's a Twiggs challenge that I want you to go back and take. I challenge you to have your coach hold you accountable. And by the way, your coach has a rule of 5 document that you can get from him or her. And basically what you'll do is you'll commit to doing 5 different things over the next week. You can even let him or her know the 5 things you did to find an A player. But that's the rule of 5. And really you can think about the different hiring resources or other ideas and best practices that you learn about. We're coming down the home stretch. Reason number 4 is the failure to ask. And when I say the failure to ask, I'm referring to the failure to ask the right questions. Help me out with something. Do candidates ever stretch the truth when it comes to their resume and their background? You bet they do. I like this quote by Stanley Randall. The closest anyone ever comes to perfection is how they present themselves on their resume. We have to ask the right questions so we can get down to the truth of the matter. And you're about to learn some enhanced interview questions. Your coach has these as well. But here are the key interview questions. What accomplishments are you most proud of? This is a good question to ask because A players tend to talk about results. So an A player will tell you, I was number 1 in sales in my district. I led my region in gross profit as a percentage of sales. They'll tell you specific and measurable results, while the B and C players will tell you touchy-feely things that really don't move the needle at the end of the day. That's a good question. What accomplishments are you most proud of? Next question, what was your supervisor's name, and have them spell it out? For example, so what was your supervisor's name? Was Mike Haley? How do you spell Haley? Haley. That sends the candidate the message that you're going to check their references. And please write this down. TORC. It's a great acronym by Dr. Brad Smart. It stands for Threat of Reference Check. When they know you're going to check their reference anyway, they'll tend to be more truthful with their answers. Next question. What will Mike say when I ask him about what you were great at? Did you notice? I didn't say if I ask him, I said when I ask about what you were great at. It's interesting. I did this for a client and I did a second interview, and you could literally hear the candidate swallowing over the phone because he was so uncomfortable. And up until this point, he was confident, he was Mr. Greatest, and he was telling me about all of his accomplishments. But when I asked him that question, he had to pause for a moment and became uncomfortable. So this is a great question. When they know you're going to ask, they'll tend to be more honest. And by the way, you want to ask each of these questions for every job. And you want to start from the beginning. You want to go in chronological order from when they graduated from tech school to where they are in the present. It's a little tip because people tend to remember better when they're talking in chronological order. When they're talking from the beginning to now, they remember better and they'll tell you more information. What will Mike say when I ask him about what you're not great at? Notice I didn't say, what are your weaknesses? When you ask a candidate what your weaknesses are, you'll get that canned response. If they've been on a lot of interviews, they know how to answer that question. It tends to generate a canned response if you ask about weaknesses. But when you ask what you were not great at, that kind of changes it. It makes them pause a little bit and you'll get a more truthful answer. Here's a good question. Why did you leave the job? And don't take what they say at face value. The number one answer I get when I ask this question, why did you leave the job? They'll say, it was a mutual understanding. We left because it was a mutual understanding. My response is, tell me more about that mutual understanding. And I just be quiet and I let them talk. And by the time they finish talking, they tell me all kinds of things. I did this one time and it started out as a mutual agreement, mutual understanding. By the time they finished talking, he told me that he was fired because he couldn't meet his sales quota. And of course, he never told the original interviewer that little tidbit. So very important you ask that question. And again, you're asking that question for every job because you want to look for patterns. And if it was a mutual decision for every position they've had, that's a red flag. How would your supervisor rate your overall performance on a scale of 1 to 10 and why? And we find that consistent answers of lower than 8, again, that means they weren't an A player and that should be considered as a red flag. We've talked about the key interview questions. Next, the final reason for a wrong hire is the failure to reference check. And from my experience, this is the step of the process that's skipped the most. Because again, we said bad hiring decisions are birthed out of desperation. When you're desperate, you just want to bring somebody on and you say, I don't have time to do a reference check. But this is a critical step that gets skipped. Who should they come from? My recommendation is that they come from a former supervisor, someone that's familiar with their work. I'm not against character references from like a neighbor or a pastor, but you won't get real information about their actual performance from a character reference. And most candidates aren't going to have you contact someone that's going to say something bad about them. That's why it's good to talk to a former supervisor to find out the truth. What can you legally ask a reference? That's a question I get all the time. Here's the answer. You can legally ask a reference whatever you want. The burden is on the reference and what they're willing to tell you. People have been sued because they've given someone a bad reference and that person didn't get the job. But the burden is on that particular reference, and no one has ever been sued for saying something good about someone. So if the reference is unwilling to tell you anything, that's a read between the line conversation. They're really saying that the person wasn't truly an A player. We verified this with Sesco, our HR consulting company that we partner with. You can ask the reference whatever you want. It's all about what they're willing to tell you. And now we're going to discuss specific reference check questions. What was the nature of your working relationship with Eric? You want to verify that this was an actual supervisor that's qualified to give a good reference. What was Eric's biggest strengths? Again, this just gives you an opportunity to compare what the reference perception was to the candidate's perception. What was Eric's biggest areas for improvement back then? And when you say back then, it can make the reference more willing to talk because you're saying, okay, not now. What were their biggest areas of improvement back then? It was in the past. You can get them to open up and talk about different weaknesses, and you can compare what they say to what the candidate might have said. How would you rate his performance on a scale of 1 to 10? Again, responses of lower than 8 should set off a red flag that this candidate wasn't an A player. During our interview, Eric mentioned that he struggled with holding parts margins on the job. Can you tell me more about that? This is a great way to find out some additional information about the candidate that the candidate may be trying to hide. And the reference will be more willing to talk about it if you lead in with the fact that, hey, Eric has already said he struggled with this. So it's not the reference throwing Eric under the bus. That's a great question. And here's the knockout question. Knowing what you know today, would you rehire Eric? And anything other than an enthusiastic yes should be considered a red flag. Most of your questions were answered during today's webinar. I would encourage you to partner with your coach and get any additional questions or concerns answered and have them send you the documents for today's webinar. I just want to leave you with this closing thought. I challenge you to make the commitment to hire tough so that you can manage easy. I'm Eric Twiggs, and good luck with finding that A player.